Welcome, everyone. We're happy to have you this evening. I'm Jennifer Lazeski, the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology. Our mission is to promote the enjoyment, study, and conservation of Wisconsin's birds. And I think we're going to have a little bit of all three of those things tonight. So we're grateful to our presenters that are here to talk about Connecticut Warblers. Just one more quick announcement. We are looking for a couple things with the convention that we sent out in the member email last week. So we're looking for help with our slogan for the convention and for the t-shirt design. So you can refer to last week's email, send me a note if you can't find it, or we're going to send you a reminder next week. Then also, if you have any suggestions for virtual or in-person programming for 2023, please feel free to let me know. I do my hunting around and talking to people, and we seem to have been finding some people that really resonate with our members. So if you have some great ideas, let me know. And we'll get working on that because we have a few long months in winter where we can do some more virtual programming. And we're looking forward to doing more in person next year. So at this time, I'd like to welcome our guest presenters tonight, Brian Collins and Ryan Brady. We are very excited to have them here to talk about the work they've been doing with Connecticut Warblers. So I'll let you take it away.
All right, I will get started, and I guess folks could put stuff into the chat, Jennifer, right? If they needed to, and Jennifer will keep an eye on the chat if you have especially if it's a question that you feel like needs to be clarified kind of right away or something. My name is Ryan Brady. I'm a conservation biologist in the Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation with Wisconsin DNR, based up in Ashland on the shore of Lake Superior. And I'm thankful to have so many people interested in the story of the Connecticut Warbler. And it's definitely a story that's got some ups and downs, and hoping to share that with you today so we're all a little bit wiser and can take some actions to help this bird. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we will get going.
You're all set.
All good. All right. So first up, we should get a little bit of background, what this bird is about, and we'll cover kind of some range-wide type trends. And then I'll kind of move into setting the stage for the Wisconsin story. And then that's where Brian comes in, and he's going to be the star of the show, sharing all the fun stuff that he did this past summer. And then at the end, I'll come in and kind of wrap up with a few slides about where we're headed from a conservation perspective for this species. So first up, I think many of you are aware of the Connecticut Warbler, and if you're a birder, it's certainly a bird that's been high on your list, often highly sought. In part because it's uncommon to rare, right? And so that makes it very appealing. You don't see many of them, you don't take them for granted. And that's true that they're fairly uncommon across much of their range. They're narrowly distributed, meaning across their breeding range in the pink here on the map, just a narrow swath of this kind of northern forest, the boreal transition zone, as well as the southern boreal forest. Where they nest across Canada. And current estimates, just so we're kind of on the same page here, range in the low millions for the overall population estimate of Connecticut warblers. The low end estimate is through Partners in Flight from breeding bird survey data. That higher end estimate is through better survey data in Canada and the Boreal Avian Modeling Project that generates an estimate closer to 4.7 million. So just for comparison, Kirtland's warblers, the global population is closer to like 5,000. Golden wing warblers, you're looking at maybe 400,000, 500,000, somewhere in there for their global population. And then something that's real common like a yellowthroat, the estimate's somewhere in the ballpark of 75, 80 million. So that's the general rarity for this bird, although those estimates are not precise, mostly because of the survey techniques involved. About 97% or more at this point, given the declines of that breeding population, is in Canada. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, very much on the edge of its range and only becoming increasingly so as declines kick in and the bird retreats northward. Overall, it's difficult to detect. And what I mean by that, most of you know, right? They're kind of secretive, they're skulky. The exception would be these singing males, especially, you know, late May through say mid-July or so, where they sing and quite loudly at times. If you've been out listening for them in the breeding season or even migration, you can sometimes hear them far away. Generally though, given the remote habitats, the remote breeding range that they have, and their behavior, they're kind of a hard bird to detect and therefore monitor. And what that has meant is that the bird is one of the most poorly understood songbird species in all of North America. Very little research has been done. Monitoring hasn't been great. We still don't have a great grip on really how many there are and where they are, for that matter, even on the breeding grounds, let alone the wintering areas. With that said, we do know a few things. One is that, as many of you know, it's one of our late spring migrants, one of the last ones to show up here in Wisconsin around mid-May, and especially the latter half of the month. Then they breed here in the summer. And then in the fall, many of them move eastward over towards the eastern US and especially the northeast US. And that's kind of shown in yellow on this map. Some of them make these large transoceanic fall flights, meaning 48 hours, maybe up to 72 hours over the water, stop in Cuba or the Caribbean, and then leap on down to the wintering grounds in South America. And we'll talk more about those later. They're also known to occupy during the breeding season a variety of different habitat types. And what's key here is that they are different cover types, but as Brian will go into, I'm sure, and I'll just briefly mention, the structural features of these habitats are generally the same across these various cover types and tree types. So the primary one that they use and many associate with are these black spruce and tamarack lowlands. These are older, taller black spruce and tamarack trees for the most part. And they generally are widely spaced trees, uneven spacing, some canopy gaps, things like that. At the eye level, you're seeing pretty open conditions. So that mid canopy needs to be open. There can't be many saplings or smaller trees that kind of clutter that eye level view. But then down at the knee level and below, especially down towards ankle level, there you need that brush and that cover. So in the form of moss at the ground layer, and then ericaceous shrubs like maybe Labrador tea or leatherleaf if we're in some of these boggy areas, or blueberry is very, very important, as you'll find out. The other habitat that they use a lot in Wisconsin are jack pine on very sandy soil. So you have this black spruce tamarack lowlands, really soggy, soupy sort of habitat, hard to get into. And then kind of a complete opposite, these older jack pine stands, extremely dry and sandy. And yet, look at how similar the structure is. Similar blueberry on the understory, moss on the understory, open mid-level, taller trees with uneven spacing. So remarkably similar in structure. And in some parts of the range, and this isn't a perfect picture to depict it, but they're using aspen forests. And this is especially true in Western Canada, from Western Saskatchewan through Alberta and into barely into British Columbia. They're using a lot of aspen forests. So this is older aspen with the same structural characteristics. So very, very interesting. And when they were a more common bird in Wisconsin, they used to use this habitat more. Now you don't find them here except during migration. So unfortunately, across the entire range, the North American Breeding Bird Survey, and that's what BBS is, has demonstrated declines of greater than 60% in this species. Now there's an asterisk there because the Breeding Bird Survey isn't a perfect survey for monitoring this bird. So that number, take it with a grain of salt. But the point is it's been on a steady decline in the last half century, and especially in the last, say, 3 decades, much like many of our neotropical migrant birds. So that hasn't earned it any like endangered or threatened status at the national level, but Partners in Flight, which is a major partnership of experts, if you will, that put out a land bird plan in 2016. They've identified it as a watch list species, in this case, a yellow watch list species. And what it's meant in this case is still a decent number of birds out there, but steeply declining. Many of these have lost 50 to 90% of their population in the last 40 years. And so that certainly fits the bill. In Wisconsin, it's a species of greatest conservation need as identified in our last wildlife action plan. And it is not endangered or threatened at the state level at this point. At that time, it was listed as a species of special concern. And that's, excuse me, something that will get potential reconsideration as we move towards revising that wildlife action plan in the next few years for 2025. So why are we seeing these range-wide declines? And very importantly, these are all hypothetical. This bird's not very well known. Nobody has a good grip on exactly what's going on. And it's very unlikely to be one of these things. It's probably a combination of some or all of them. And this needs a lot of work. So these are just guesses at this point, hypotheses. And so one of them is in the jack pine habitats, we've lost quite a bit of the older jack pine. Now, some of that is due to harvest. And when the stands were mature, they were cut. So we lost them. Some of that's fire suppression and not getting good jack pine regeneration and keeping it on the landscape. And some of it is a conversion to red pine, which has a shorter rotation for harvest and is often favored over jack pine in the forestry setting. So those are some issues in the jack pine landscape. In the lowland black spruce and tamarack, we don't have a really good grip as to what's going on. Those habitats themselves haven't changed a great deal. What has changed is around them. We've lost a lot of conifer in the surrounding landscape. And many times that's harvested right up to the edge of a bog per se. And then what comes back is maybe aspen dominated or some other deciduous tree. And so in that case, losing that conifer essentially fragments that habitat more. Again, hypothesis not demonstrated through any scientific research at this point. Climate change impacts could be playing a role in some way that we don't yet know. They are highly vulnerable according to the latest Audubon report and likely to retreat northward with projections in climate change. And then migration, there's a whole bunch of challenges in migration. I said this bird, a lot of them in the fall go to the northeast. Well, in the northeast, it is a gauntlet of development, right? I mean, it's just really difficult to find quality stopover habitat that allows you to then launch yourself 2 days nonstop over the Atlantic Ocean. Not to mention all of the infrastructure that you could collide with along the way. Communication towers, wind turbines, windows, whatever it may be. And then lastly, wintering ground habitat loss. And we think this is potentially a really big factor in South America. But again, still don't have a good grip exactly what's going on. There was a recent study in the last decade that tracked some Connecticut warblers and put little backpacks on them, and they fly down to South America. And then when they come back to the breeding grounds, you capture them again, look at the device, and you're able to devise where the birds were. And if you look at these 4 different maps for different birds from different areas, they all kind of head down to the same part of South America. If you look at the endpoints on all those in South America. And that region is the second largest forest to the Amazon in South America. And it's known as the Gran Chaco. And it's shown here in green, and it covers portions of Bolivia and northern Argentina, Paraguay, part of Brazil. And in that recent paper, they indicated that the Gran Chaco is suffering severe and rapid deforestation. So it's considered a global deforestation hotspot, and it's not slowing anytime soon. So if you're losing a lot of your wintering habitat, that doesn't put you in a very good position to either make it back to the wintering grounds or reproduce successfully here. All right, so let's look at the Wisconsin story, and then we'll move on to Brian's fun stuff. So the Wisconsin story, we're going to pick it up with the first breeding bird atlas in 1995. And so this is a map showing the atlas blocks where the bird was found during that first atlas in the late 1900s. Even at this time, there were probably some declines already evident. But this is a good snapshot or a baseline for our story today. And you can see I've circled kind of some of the core areas there. Excuse me a minute. So you've got birds throughout the Northwoods, but you got them really kind of concentrated kind of near the Northern Highland in the Northeast, across the Northwest Sands and into portions of Douglas County, some of the lowland area, and then down a little disjunct population in the Central Sands near Jackson County. Now pay attention to that, because we're going to fast forward to the second atlas, 2015 to 2019. And you can see the drastically reduced number of blocks in which those birds were found. So I will toggle back up and then toggle back down. And so that second atlas, we weren't surprised to see declines, but we saw quite significant declines in all of those areas, but especially Northern Highland and the surrounding vicinity away from the northwest corner of the state. So this is a different way of looking at it. The yellow represent atlas blocks that had Connecticut Warbler in the first atlas, but not in the second atlas. And there are 36 of those. The blue blocks represent blocks where the bird was only found in the second atlas. There are only 4 of those. And then the gray blocks represent where it was found in both, and that was only 3 blocks. So overall, that's a net loss in this fair comparison of blocks with good effort of about 70% occupancy lost. So quite significant as of 2019. So that raised some alarm bells. It was one of the steepest decliners in our atlas results. So what we did was we went back in 2021 and we visited historical sites that we knew had Connecticut warblers. And then we also visited what we deemed to be high quality sites. So these were sites that by looking at maps and remotely sensed vegetation data, had good tamarack, black spruce bog, that kind of situation, or really good jack pine stands. And we went and visited 58 of those sites, all of them away from that red star. That red star represents an area that we knew already had birds, so we didn't bother to survey it in 2021. We knew it had some birds. We wanted to see what we had everywhere else. We went to 58 other sites, surveyed 428 points, found no Connecticut warblers. We didn't expect to find many, but we didn't expect to find 0. So this map shows you kind of the retreat into the northwest corner of the state. The black squares and the green squares are where the last year of detection was pre-2000. So you're talking 3 decades ago was the last time anybody found a Connecticut warbler there that we know of. The yellow squares are since 2000 up until the second atlas. And so you can see the yellow ones really kind of retreat northward and become reduced in the northern highland, northeast corner of the state there. Then the orange squares represent Atlas II. You can see now very few of them away from the northwest corner of the state. And then following those 2021 surveys, we were left with just the red squares. Those 2 red squares are the only places as of the end of 2021 that we knew of any Connecticut warblers during the summer season in Wisconsin. So our goal then became, oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Before you move on, we had a question from Ron Eckstein about in the Northern Highland, did they nest in lowland conifers or upland jack pine?
Mostly lowland conifer, but I think there might have been, I don't know it well, but I think there was an interplay there. It wasn't in these mostly jack pine stands. But if you have, just like with some other species like spruce grouse, if you have jack pine near the lowland conifer, that's a win-win. I think that's attractive to the bird if it has the right structure. So in 2022, we wanted to go back then to the only place we knew had Connecticut warblers, and that's those red squares. And the goals then were, how many do we have? Do we have 5 Connecticut warblers? Do we have 50 Connecticut warblers? Do we have 100 Connecticut warblers? Like, we didn't even really have a good grip on how many were out there. So we wanted to know how many were in those areas. So we did some pretty good surveys around there. And we also wanted to know, were these just singing males, or do we have females? Are they paired? Are they nesting successfully, or is this some sort of sink, if you will, meaning they're attracted there, but then don't successfully breed due to parasitism or predation or some other reason? And so these were the types of things that we wanted to explore last year to kind of get that last piece of the status puzzle. Status meaning how many are out there? What is this bird's condition in terms of a population in the state? And so that's where Brian comes in. While a few of us DNR folks were able to do some surveys, we needed to bring in the big guns, and that was Brian. And we hired Brian Collins as a field technician, which the Bureau of Natural Heritage Conservation has done for almost 15 years now, I think. Brian's been a contractor for the state many times. He is an absolute ace field birder, extremely keen observer, exceptional photographer, and if we knew that he was the man for the job. And so Brian came on to try and answer these questions. And I think in the process, not only did he answer these questions, I think he might have fallen in love with the Connecticut warbler a little bit. I think maybe a little bit. And so he's going to share with you a bit of that love, I think. And he just has some fascinating tales to tell. And so I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Unless anybody had any questions I could clean up before we get going on his section.
Ryan, thank you. That touches my heart. That's quite a compliment too. I appreciate that.
I will stop sharing.
What's that?
I will stop sharing, and you go ahead and take over.
And so I had a little glitch. So Jennifer's going to be running my slideshow for me. So it'll be like back in the day with the film strip where we go, next slide.
Right.
Or I could go,
except, all right, let's see if I can get where I need to be here. There we go.
All righty. And yeah, this is, I think my purpose is to kind of try to bring you along into the world of the Connecticut warbler and what I experienced last summer. And I'm also going to go back into 2021 a little bit too, because I think that's important to the story. Whoops, I think there's a couple slides right before this one.
Yeah.
Go back a couple here.
So let's see if I can figure that out. There we go.
So we got to start with slide number 1 because a couple days ago was my mother's birthday. So there's a dual purpose for this slide. Melinda Knutson is here tonight. Melinda was someone who had the courage to hire me when I was just 22 years old, and I ran community surveys on the Mississippi River with her as an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota when I was pursuing wildlife and fisheries. When I was 14 years old, I had the honor of being mentored by Fred Lesher. Got to do stuff in Puerto Rico with Bethany Woodworth when I was 20 years old. Craig Thompson took me bird banding my first time when I was 18. Eileen Kirsch, worked with her with Fish and Wildlife Service for a long time. And so I had a life of people surrounding me and really nurturing me. And my mother really gave me a love of wilderness and wild places. So they're all really important to this story. But also, interestingly enough, Matt Berg, welcome aboard. Matt was the one who introduced me to the whole natural heritage crew with the DNR, and I started trying to get into doing summer work with Kim Grevels, and then had a working relationship with Rich Staphen for 14 years of the 15 years, perhaps all 15 years. And so I'm just ever thankful for Ryan and Nick, Ryan Brady, Nick Anich, everybody who's been so supportive in this journey because, we all need each other, and we're just like ecosystems. We're totally interdependent beings. And so thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be here tonight. And I'm nervous as heck, but we're gonna have a great time. So and happy birthday, Mom. All right, here's the next slide, please. So the Connecticut Warbler, I named this Adventures in the Blueberries because that really seems to be an important aspect to this whole story here in Northwest Wisconsin. And so, there's been some perhaps even misunderstanding as to what the habitat parameters were, or maybe when the birds were way more common, they were not so picky. But as they declined in number, they started becoming increasingly found in a single type of habitat. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. Thank you. So of note, before anyone gets too skeptical of the experiences, remember that a Connecticut Warbler song can be heard. My longest distance of detection that I tracked down by GPS from point A to point B is 690 meters. So this is a bird that when it sings in ideal conditions, it absolutely rocks. It's a bird that has a great voice. It pierces through and is clear as a bell. And sometimes you'll hear one and you think it's very, very close, and 250 meters later, you're still walking and still hearing it. So they're really a detectable bird. Yes, next slide, please. So this is the part where I have to do the big brag. And just because right at the bottom, you see it says, "We are a crazy bunch." And so a quick little story. I was driving in 2021 when we were doing all those best habitat surveys, looking for the elusive Connecticut Warbler. I was driving down a road, probably about 4:45, 4:50 in the morning, headlights, and the road was just sand in the middle of the Empire Swamp. Lots of curves and a lot of habitat and not much road. And I saw headlights coming towards me, which was really kind of strange because you never see headlights at 4:50 in the morning in the middle of the Empire Swamp. And the two cars, mine and the other car, we passed each other very, very carefully and happened to both look into the car to see who the driver was. And I saw beaming back at me, Nick Anich's face. And so he stopped and rolled down our windows. And Nick said he knew it was going to be me because we'd probably be the only people crazy enough to be out there at that time. So there's a lot of adventure in these sorts of surveys. I've done about 3,000 surveys for natural heritage conservation. Each one's got to be about 300 meters apart. If you put in all the entry hikes, return hikes, and all that kind of stuff, what I figured out is more or less I've hiked from Superior, Wisconsin to Miami, Florida, but all in untrailed backcountry in the state of Wisconsin in the last 15 years. So I've got to see a lot of really, really cool things, and hope to bring some of that flavor to you. But you can see on the map here, this is just 3 different mornings of searching for Connecticut Warblers. You can see each one of those dark blue X's is spaced 300 meters from any other blue X. So you get a sense of the distance there. By the time you get to the end of a bog, it's 9:40 in the morning and the survey work is done. Then you got to get yourself back out of a bog. But you'll notice there's a couple of snowshoe hair marks there too. Sometimes I'll just keep track of things that I see and keep natural history notes, and maybe think to go back and see what that's all about someday. But the credentials here, I guess, for all the people that supported me as a birder and all the people that taught me wilderness skills, it's really coming in handy. But I guess the number one thing is you got to be kind of a little bit crazy. All right, next slide, please. So here's the skill set, and the skill set is birdsong identification. First and foremost, you've got to be really, really solid at not just the songs, but also the calls. I started cultivating that in 8th grade. And then backcountry navigation, it's actually, when you're out there, there's not a whole lot of ways to get yourself rescued if you screw up. So you want to make sure you're good at navigation. You've got to have good wilderness skills, including having a good safety pack with you for first aid and things like that. You've got to plan ahead, so you need safety culture as well, and a good work ethic. And the reason I'm saying this right now is I'm not sure the average age of the people listening, but if there's anybody right now who's out there at Stevens Point pursuing an undergraduate in wildlife and fisheries, or if there's someone up at Northland maybe someone at UW-Madison or at the University of Minnesota, someone's at one of these conservation biology schools. These are some things to think about. Get to know your birds, get to know topo maps, compasses and GPSs, and get to, think about how it is that you could incorporate yourself into a life of doing field birding. Because I know, none of us are getting any younger, so we're going to need ranks to fill in someday. And but one thing that I pride myself in too, and that I'm going to brag, that's the 405 pound, that's rep number 2 on heavy days. I'm a powerlifting coach as well, and I work out with my kids. And when you're going through bog hummocks and you're sailing over the tops of those sphagnum hummocks, there's nothing better to get you over there than a whole winter of heavyweight training. I think what we do is very physically demanding, and you gotta stay up with it. I'm a heavy guy. I weigh about 225. So for me, running or doing cardio doesn't quite cut it, because I got a lot of mass to move through that forest. I'm kind of a moose. So, all right. And I did forget one thing too. So next slide, please. You have to have a sincere love of mosquitoes. Aldo Leopold said that it must be a poor life that achieves freedom from fear. And I think that, part of being a bird surveyor and getting into the world of other birds and becoming an acute observer is seeing how, all those interdependencies and ecosystems work, and the fact that we're part of it. So you guys have heard of birds and beers before? I call it birds and bears. In fact, I think they misnamed the Flambeau River State Forest. When I was in there, I saw so many bears, I decided to call it the Flam Bear. And then warblers go with wolves too. There's a lot of ecological complexity out there, and a lot of good keystone and umbrella species, indicator species. And I've had the opportunity to see a lot of wolves and a lot of bears out there. I stopped counting bears at 40 some encounters, and with wolves, I stopped counting at 14, and I think we're closer to about 20 something wolf encounters, and it really makes the experience exciting. And I think that Connecticut warbler habitat is really good wolf habitat and really good bear habitat. And we'll get into that a little bit too. So yes, next please. Every field season is filled with adventure. It's filled with beauty. If you find yourself in bogs at the end of a field day, you're 3 miles in a bog, and now you can't do bird surveys because it's too late in the morning, but that's about the time the butterflies start taking flight, and all the invertebrates are heating up. So you see dragonflies. This is a Dorcas copper, I believe, here on some of the bog plants. And take some time on the way back to enjoy the color of the warblers, to get to know the warblers a little bit better. And in the evenings, if you're far from home and you've got nothing better to do, why not see what's going on with the local wildlife? One evening I spent laying on the middle of a sand road in the Black River State Forest, watching a Blanding's turtle donate blood to all those mosquitoes. I felt so bad for the turtle. I took off my long sleeves and took some of the mosquitoes from the turtle. But it's just really being involved for a whole summer, each summer, completely immersed in your environment. So yes, next slide, please. All right, so regarding Connecticut warblers now specifically, Matt Berg actually was the first person to really tune me into Connecticut warblers, and he was doing some work with Bayfield County, and I was doing work with Natural Heritage Conservation over by the White River State Wildlife Area and the White River Fishery Area, over by Perch Lake and just north of Drummond. And he said, hey, if you want to see a Connecticut warbler, there's a really neat spot you could check out. And he showed me on a map back in the day when we actually used a map and a pencil. This is 2008. I drove down a long sandy road and followed his directions and found a Connecticut warbler, and never had realized how skulky they are, how absolutely difficult it is to find one and see one, even though they're singing right there. But on the way out, I looked down and I noticed thousands upon thousands of blueberries that were ripening. And I knew that in a couple of weeks coming back there, I would be able to fill some buckets. So the picture on the left is my son, my daughter, and my wife, and we were picking blueberries in this beautiful spot in Bayfield County while listening to the chorus of jack pine birds. And by this time, not so much the Connecticut warbler, although they were there and they were singing. And that's when Matt had already put this together, that blueberries, old jack pine, and Connecticut warblers seem to go hand in hand in hand. or hand in hand and wing. And having this delicious resource at our feet was also equally immersive. And so in 2021, having a conversation about this, the conservation of the bird, it seemed like blueberries might be an important thing to focus on, because not only are they good for Connecticut warblers and their breeding, but it seems like they're also really good for people. And if we can encourage blueberries to be part of the incentive, we could probably encourage the conservation of this bird long term. So in 2015, Matt and I were just atlasing like crazy. We were out covering a lot of territories. He was doing mussel surveys and lake surveys, and I was doing bird surveys in the Brule River State Forest. And we got together and we kind of got it in our heads. We were going to confirm some species in the Douglas and Bayfield County area. And we went out one day, and the picture on the right is actually the male of a pair that we confirmed that day. It was the 10th of July, if I'm not mistaken, in 2015. And we heard them singing. We entered into an area that was marked as managed forest open land. And we walked in, and there's a little call. The female in that picture is doing a call. I call it the squink call. It's kind of a metallic little squink. And it's uttered in two different ways. One is more of a chip and one is more of a robust squink. And I think the males also do the more robust squink call. But we heard these calls. Matt was 150 meters from me, and I heard the calls, and there was a bird singing south of me, and Matt, I figured, was on that bird. And I heard the squink calls again, and a little fledgling flushed up out of the blueberries, and I'd confirmed Connecticut Warbler. I went to text Matt to tell him how excited I was, and my text lit up, and Matt was confirming one at the same time. We had confirmed 2 Connecticut Warblers breeding within 150 yards of each other. And so when 2022 came along and I was going to be going up there and trying to figure out stuff about their breeding, I thought, heck, this is going to be easy. Because what I didn't realize is Matt and I had pulled off the nearly impossibly improbable to confirm a Connecticut Warbler in that short order. It's unheard of. And we absolutely lucked out. Of course, there were more birds in 2015, but we totally lucked out. So it turns out the place we confirmed them was incredibly close to the place where they would end up in 2022. So, but once again, the formula was old jack pine and blueberries. And you can see, just like Ryan talked about, you've got this open space, and that open space there between the jack pine unevenly spaced trees has almost no high shrubs in it. It's almost all ericaceous berry. It's almost all at knee high and down. And it's a continuous layer that goes for acres and acres and acres. All right, next slide, please. So again, as I mentioned, a Connecticut Warbler song can be detected at a distance of 690 meters. And so in the time that I was in 2022, going to be trying to figure out what was going on with their breeding chronology, I also had to try to find more pairs. In 2021, we were just looking to find out how many pairs we could find. Next slide, please. So 2021 for me was bog life. I had the honor of going into a lot of the umpire swamps, black spruce bogs, some spruce tamarack bogs, and we searched long and with great hope for Connecticut warblers, and we covered a lot of amazing bogs. Now, we didn't find any Connecticut warblers, but we found out how amazing these black spruce bogs are. For example, I'm really not sure how many yellow-bellied flycatchers made it on the and Ryan, please feel free to jump in at any time if you're available to, because I don't have the stats and I don't remember them real well from the paper that you guys published in 2021. But compare the number of yellow-bellied flycatchers that we got in our cruising through all those black spruce bogs compared to the entire Wisconsin Breeding Bird Atlas. I think there was a wealth of information that we picked up in 2021.
I don't remember the exact numbers, but yellow-bellied fly is definitely one of those species that once you kind of get out there in that habitat, you realize just how much more common they are than previously thought.
Yeah, and similarly with the Western palm warbler, you start getting into these more open areas, and where the trees are shorter and there's more space between them, and all of a sudden there's palm warblers everywhere, and so a lot of the unknown in the deeper out of reach areas still exists for people to discover and explore and develop the scientific knowledge of. But I think we kind of knocked it out of the park in 2021. In our search for Connecticut warblers, we found all kinds of other really cool stuff. And golden crown kinglets and palm warblers and yellow-bellied flycatchers are doing really spectacularly well in these black spruce bogs, as are Lincoln sparrows. So each black spruce bog had different characteristics and different quality. And sometimes you get into one and you think, oh man, here we go. The Connecticut warbler, it's going to happen. This is the spot, and you get all jazzed up and you're ready to go. You're ready to hear that song, and it didn't happen. I think, what's going on? Well, I can hear these things at, the tremendous distance. We all should. Why can't we hear them? Where are they? And you start doubting yourself. You start thinking, am I going a little crazy? So next slide, please. So then we also did the barren surveys, and we searched long and with great hope there. But again, what we're finding is there wasn't a lot of that good habitat. There's a lot of open space in there. There's a lot of hazel, a lot of oak seedlings and things like that. And I started to learn something in 2022 as I cruised around, and that is that you may find a black and white warbler around a Connecticut warbler, but you're probably not going to find chestnut-sided warbler. And so a lot of the hazel obligates or the high brush species, things like that, they tend to be an indicator against the presence of a Connecticut warbler, whereas some really unlikely characters pop up. If you've got a barrens and you're hearing a lot of blue-headed vireo and you're hearing a lot of eastern wood pewee, well, now we might be into something. But as soon as you hear that, please, please, pleased to meet you, it's pretty much casting doubt on the presence of a Connecticut warbler in this day and age. Next slide, please. So in 2021, the doubt was really setting in about my own sanity. I was thinking I was really off my rocker. You have days and days working by yourself in the forest, and you're just not hearing that target bird. And so remember, Ryan talked about that red star. I drove back to the red star on July 3rd. I headed right to the old 2015 Wisconsin Breeding Bird 2 area, right to that core. And I got out of my vehicle at 6:30 in the morning, opened up the door, and I heard one sing. And so I GPSed my location, and I started moving in on the bird. And 630 meters later, I was standing under it. So I knew right there that I could hear one at 630 meters. I wasn't off my rocker. I was in a world that didn't have Connecticut warblers, and now I was in one that did, and I could hear the difference. And so we know for sure we hear them when they're present. Next slide, please. So there is a kind of a sadness about some of the loss of habitat, but they're just, you can't cast blame. I don't think anybody really understood. A lot of this land is private land. A lot of this land is, managed forest open, or it's logging company land or whatever. And people have plans, and they have agendas that they're going to do. And without knowing how fast the Connecticut warbler was declining, there were some pretty good stands since 2008 that have been taken down just because the jack pine were getting old. So a lot of the habitat that we're seeing right now isn't really good. It's got a lot of this high brush in it. But in 2022, while cruising around looking for territories, we did mark a lot of really good habitat for the future. There are stands that will present some promise. There's stands that are going to mature and they're going to do well. Next slide, please. So here's where we get to this year, the core area. We had to find territories in order to collect habitat data. We needed to find the territories to get the reproductive data. And every picture that you're seeing here was taken within within about 300 meters of each other on kind of what seems to be like the last chance and the last stand for this bird for the immediate future. But not the last chance forever, because I think there's a lot of possibility in long-term planning, 50, 70 years out, where we could really bring this population back. It just, we got to figure it out. But what I think we're looking at here in this picture, this is ideal habitat. And here you can see the blueberry layer underneath. You can see the tall trees, a lot of uneven spacing. You can see that the trees are older. They're kind of decrepit in the understory. This is Eastern wood pewee paradise. It's a hermit thrush paradise. There's a lot of blue-headed vireo in here. There's a community that really has a look to it. And by the way, American robins, when you see them in town, don't let them fool you. They are the king of the wild. American robins are spectacular inhabitants of eastern hemlock forests and also these jack pine forests. And to see them in that really wild element is really, really exciting. The American robin is one of the more abundant birds in this habitat. On the upper left, you see a male Connecticut warbler, and on the upper right, you see a female Connecticut warbler. And to give you an idea of what it is to see both of them together in this day and age, it's pretty exciting. And in this area, every male was paired with a female. All right, next slide, please. How are we doing for time too? Am I keeping it going okay? Are we are we good? It's kind of strange talking to the silent Zoom screen, but
I think you're good. I think you're good,
okay.
Brian.
Yep, you're doing good on time. We're
Awesome.
at 10 to 8, so
All right.
you got time to finish up and we'll have time for questions.
Awesome. So we ended up only finding 3 territories, and that was kind of sad. I mean, we covered about 15 square miles at the same time that I was trying to monitor these 3 territories. I was trying to find more, and they just weren't out there. So we ended up finding just 3 territories, all in the same general area where we confirmed breeding in 2015. And it turns out that one territory occupies maybe about 1.5 acres, which is about 50 meters from the next territory, which occupies about 1.5 acres, which is about 50 meters from the next territory, which occupies 1.5 acres. So all told, you've got about 4.5 acres occupied by 3 pairs. They're all in a kind of a straight line. And so once I had the birds found, once I had found that all 3 were mated pairs, we had 3 males, we had 3 females. It was very clear that they were interested in nesting or nesting. The next thing to do was to try to generate some data that could figure out their nest chronology and their ideal habitat use. So Rich put forth right away that it was critical that we do some spot mapping. I think the next slide is that of our spot maps. Nope. Okay, let's fill you in with a little adventure. So these are all pictures that are taken at that site. Upper left, you can see that there's the pink lady slipper. Really beautiful. In early June, the place is blooming with pink lady slipper coming up through the blueberries. The wolf pack there, the alpha male is a beast. He's got a 5-inch track. He's really huge. You can see the alpha female down in the bottom right. I got to hear her walk through the woods once. I think that was her. I'm not 100% sure. The tracks later on the sand road indicated it probably was her, and I got to see her another time. And then the thing in my fingers in the bottom left, sorry about the gore there, that's the bone of a fawn white-tailed deer. I sat my 3-legged stool down to sit and wait and watch and hope for, you can see the Jack Johnson lyrics there, sit and wait and watch and wish. And but I was waiting for something to happen, and I happened to look down around my feet and noticed that my feet were actually in pretty good saturation of blood. And I thought, what is going on here? And I looked around and I could see the remains of some deer, and I realized I was sitting right on top of a fresh wolf kill. But there was the deer was small enough that there wasn't much left, just some of the soft tissue and a few bone fragments. You can see in my fingers in the bottom center, that's actually a little gray caterpillar. And that caterpillar told me something really important. In the picture where I'm standing with my binoculars, you can see that long carpet of blueberries behind me. And that female Connecticut warbler is spending almost 99% of her time underneath that canopy of blueberries, and she's walking. She's not making any sounds. She's eating caterpillars. She's living a life. She's fluttering up probably to the understory of the blueberries and picking caterpillars. She's feeding her fledglings down on the ground under the blueberries, and she's walking to them. They're not like any other bird. They just don't fly around. They walk under the blueberries. And so as I kind of wrap up here, I'm not sure if I'll get through all the slides, but it was kind of like hunting trophy mice. And it was like trying to pay attention to three mice that kind of acted like birds. So I see Ryan's clicked on here. You've heard that reference too, right?
Yeah, I've heard it several times from a number of people associated with Connecticut Warblers now, and that is, the idea of resembling forest mice in their behavior. So there's definitely something to that.
Yeah, and if you can imagine sitting there, you're trying to gather biological information. You're there at 5 a.m. and you're there until 10 a.m. and you're watching a male sing for 2.5 hours and preen, and then seconds of a little squink squink call, and you turn and look, and there's a female, and get the binoculars excitedly on her, and you watch her, and a minute and a half later she flies down, she's gone again. You don't see her again for a day. It's like really kind of frustrating, but also amazing to see how absolutely stealthy this bird is. The males aren't stealthy. You can hear them from, half a mile away almost, but the females, you could almost step on one and never know it. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. So while I was gone looking for other birds, other possible territories, I always left behind a Zoom H4n microscope, microphone, stereo microphone with the wind baffle on there. And I amassed over 20 hours of bioacoustical recordings between June 23rd and the 14th to just try to find out what I could find out. And I actually ended up spending about 4 hours an evening listening to what had happened while I was gone. And there were actually tremendous clues being left behind by these birds. Sometimes, for example, you'd hear two males counter singing, and as they were counter singing, then a female would get agitated and she would start squink calling right next to the male. And you could hear that definite proof that there was a lot of territorial interactions, and within the territory, a lot of male and female interactions. And just making it more and more certain that they're not just there for the long term, but they're doing something important. They're producing young. Next slide, please. All right, here's the spot mapping. So as I monitored the core areas, the Northern Territory finished up earlier. They didn't leave me with much data. They were done singing and probably done dispersing their young before the Middle and South Territories really got it done. But every time I would encounter a singing male or a calling female, I would hit the GPS and mark the point. And so what that gives us is a concentration of area where you can see what habitat needs to be measured and statistically analyzed. It gives you some degree of interaction between territories. The Middle and North Territory had some incursions. They actually had some overlaps, whereas the South Territory never really interacted physically with the other territories. And it also gives you a sense of probably where that nest activity is. You can see in the North Territory that there's this really tight cluster of points, and that's actually where I got a full-on distraction display by the female, and realized that I was actually confirming breeding in that moment. Next slide, please. This picture, I'm kind of excited about this picture, actually. This is, I believe, some serviceberry sprigs sticking up out of all that blueberry, and you can see that there's a female in there. And this was from the South Territory. And sometimes when a female would suddenly start squink calling and you'd find her, you could watch her for a while and then she would fly off, but occasionally she would fly down. And at first I thought maybe I was going to find a nest, but after talking to the research folks up in northern Minnesota, they said, well, they probably hatched them out on like the 23rd, 24th of June. It only takes 8 days for these birds to fledge because they don't fly out of the nest. They creep out of the nest like little mice. So where most of these warblers are fledging at day 14, day 15, something like that, day 12, a Connecticut warbler is fledging at day 8. And so while I thought I was looking for a nest and a nest and a nest, I was probably actually looking for dispersed fledglings throughout the blueberries. It would be like trying to find 4 secret nests instead of 1, but nests that are always moving, so you're not going to find them. And so that was one of the real exciting challenges that I failed at. But at the same time, this female would fly down to these serviceberries with these tantalizing movements that would tell me, oh, something good is going to happen. But she never carried food down there. But on that South Pair, in right around I can't remember, I think it was the 12th of July. I've got it actually in this notebook here. But the male actually started wagging his wings abruptly and started picking off caterpillars, and he filled up his beak crosswise with caterpillars and flew off to the last location I'd seen the female. And that was the only time in more than a dozen full days of sitting and watching that I actually got to see the classic carrying food. If this had been a chestnut-sided warbler, I would have seen that carrying food, 20 times a day, every day. Connecticut warbler, I literally had to put 60 hours in to see carrying food once. So fascinating. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is like hunting for trophy mice. They're famously secretive, famously cryptic. The female is under that. Look at that vast blueberry cover there in that bottom photo. And we're looking inside the Southern Territory here. There is a female in there, and she's cruising around under those blueberries, and she's looking for her fledglings and feeding her fledglings, we can assume, under those blueberries. And they have everything they need to live under those blueberries, except for perhaps a little bit of sun to preen in, in the late morning. But, all their activity, with the exception of a male singing and singing and singing and declaring that territory for 2.5 hours at a time, up in the trees, all the really important good stuff is happening underneath those blueberries, underfoot, out of view. All right, next slide, please. So I had some video, we had some technical issues, so we won't be watching the video, and I'm kind of running low on time here, but I will say that the males are really different from the females, and you can strain your neck and wear out a good pair of binoculars, can stare the lenses down on them, and you can watch a male sing for 2.5 hours and watch him preen. And if sometimes in the right time of the year, like around the 2nd of July, that male will sing from 5 a.m. until 9:45 a.m. in the same cluster of jack pines. And you can hit that GPS and make all kinds of, little marks for spot mapping, which is valuable because whereas Hal Harrison back in 1970 wrote that the Connecticut warbler male surely sings far away from the nest, I think we're finding out more and more from all the research that pretty much where the male singing is right by the hub of all the activity. That male is right over the top of the nest and then right over the top of where the female is with the fledglings. The middle territory actually shifted, which was fascinating. The male was singing in the southern location of the middle territory for the first half of the breeding season, and then moved up into the northern portion of the middle territory for the second half of the breeding season. And in that whole time, the female would appear with the male every time. And I know maybe she's going to go find him and tell him, hey, I'm okay, everything's good. But it really seemed like the male was actually moving and tracking with the female. And so when the female was following her fledglings around and feeding them, that male was then moving along. And tantalizing evidence in the middle territory, which I never completely confirmed, I did get a really nice fly down by the male, and he disappeared under the blueberries about 10 minutes after hearing the female squink call. I went to see what was going on about 10 minutes later, and sure enough, he popped up in the same spot, skulking around, preened a little bit, and flew back up and started singing. So, it's really, really tricky to try to get good biological data. But here's a good way to think about it. You buy a 500-piece jigsaw puzzle from the store. You bring it home, you put it down on the table, you flip all the pieces up, you get ready to work this puzzle. There's about 150 pieces missing. But somehow, using your spatial reasoning and everything that you can do, you put together a 350-piece, 500-piece puzzle. It's got 150 pieces missing. But if you didn't have a picture on the box, you'd still know what the picture is. You'd still be able to say, oh yeah, hey, that's a market in France or something like that, It's the same with Connecticut warblers. The evidence that they gave me was pretty spectacular in the end. I think I had about 350 of the 500-piece puzzle. So, all right, let's see. I don't know let's scroll through a couple of slides and see what I've done to us here. Yeah, I have this recording. We can't hear it now, but I'll probably post it to eBird and we'll see. But you see the morning warbler has a complex song, they do that song, but that sometimes they'll fly up in the air and they'll do all these little dorky little squeak burps, and things like that. The common yellowthroat, you'll hear the same thing. The ovenbird, you'll hear it at night. You'll hear that night song where they're really complex. Well, in 2021, Nick Anich was telling me that they just released a paper on the complex song of the Connecticut warbler. Well, I happened to be doing my bioacoustics work, and I heard that complex song, and I got it recorded. So the warblers, the Connecticut warblers there in Northwest Wisconsin, they do the complex song too, which is kind of cool. They're in a different genus, but for a long time. And I think the taxonomy is pretty close with common yellowthroat and mourning warbler. But it's really neat to see some of the behavioral, the singing behaviors emanate from these closely related species. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so just a little chronology. These guys don't start breeding until late. You see them on June 5th, they might well still be a migrant. These birds likely hatched around the 24th, 25th of June. Seems very likely they fledged around the 3rd or 4th of July. And it seems like they probably dispersed in late July. They were still there on the 19th of July. By the 21st, it was getting really, really quiet around there. But the reason I think they hatched on the 24th and 25th was that there was actually a very subtle period of time where their singing ceased almost completely. They went from singing, hundreds of times per 4-hour session to singing 15 times per 4-hour session, to the point where I thought maybe they were gone, heartbroken. And then all of a sudden, 2 days later, they were singing up a storm again. And so I think that there's a possibility in Canada or in northern Minnesota, we'll discover that there might be a singing lull associated with hatching. And that's another avenue to start exploring the mystery of Connecticut warblers. Next slide, please. And really good news. There's no cowbird parasitism there. I was worried about that. Red squirrel predation maybe is a bigger threat, but of all the ovenbirds and all the chipping sparrows, 100% of the time they all had young. In fact, at one point I was completely inundated with Nashville warbler young, ovenbird young, and chipping sparrow young everywhere, to the point where if you wanted to find a Connecticut warbler fledgling, you'd be hard pressed to do it, because every decoy is an ovenbird fledgling, And so I never once saw a cowbird fledgling, never once heard a cowbird begging. There were male cowbirds singing occasionally, but there was no parasitism at all that I detected. So my conclusion is from everything that it's likely all 3 Connecticut warblers actually successfully fledged young. So now it's in the hands of South America. It's in the hands of the migration. What happens to them from the time they leave Wisconsin to the time they come back. And next year will be really telling to know what are the effects off of the breeding grounds, because we know one thing for sure of these 3. I think they're doing really good things in that stand of jack pine. So for the future and what we're going to need, and Ryan talked about this earlier, we need old jack pine, 50 plus years. I would sit on that stool and wait for a female to squint call at me, and I would start doing whorl counts on jack pines. And I was getting trees that were 61 to 64 years old, just on the whorl calls. Only 4% of tall shrub. 96% of the understory is blueberry and no tall shrub. 100% of the ground cover is blueberry, and other things like sweet fern and bellwort, pink lady slipper, blackberries, ground hugging blackberries, and a lot of ground pine and club mosses. And again, sunny spaces, trees that have died back, some tree mortality so that they tip over and you get a sunny opening. All right, I think that's about all I got. And for time, that's definitely all I got. So can we just pop through the next slides and just look at them, and we'll just see if there's anything I haven't covered. I don't think there's anything. Yep, there we go. Last slide, we got there. So here's my question to everybody. And this is, I think, a really valuable question. It's a valuable question for bears. It's a valuable question for wolves, for hermit thrushes, for ovenbirds, for eastern wood pewees. It's a valuable question for people. Could a love of wild blueberries and old trees kissed by natural fires be the solution to bringing the Connecticut warbler back to Wisconsin? And I hope that's the answer. It's a global situation. Or a hemispheric situation. It's a multinational agreement, and it's going to have to happen. It's going to have to take place on the wintering grounds. But here on this end, I think people just got to love blueberries and old trees. We got to advocate for them. So thank you, everybody. I hope it was what you were looking for.
Awesome, Brian.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, nobody can tell those tales quite the way you can, or has the tales to tell, quite frankly, given the time that you spent out there. So can you guys see my screen again, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay. So now the question is, now what, right? So first and foremost, Brian did produce a great report. We're going to try and translate that potentially into several publications. Certainly some of those observations you heard about today will make it into the passenger pigeon in some form, and we may carve out some other stuff to publish elsewhere. But he's got a lot of intel there that hasn't been well documented, particularly in the US. And so we're going to make sure that that gets out where it needs to get to. Let me move forward here. All right, so what have we done since we kind of figured all this out? Well, first and foremost, the stand that Brian was talking about and where these birds are is a piece of private land embedded in that landscape. And so we have communicated with the private landowner about what they've got there, and they're voluntarily cooperating at this time, i.e. not harvesting the stand or causing other disturbances. And so that was first and foremost, making sure those birds were secure in the short term. Secondarily, looking to surrounding landowners, we have partnered with the Bayfield County Forest, who owns a lot of county forest land, in public land in that landscape that has jack pine on the sandy soils, a lot of potential there. And they've been very willing to cooperate with us and try and do good things for Connecticut warblers, just like they have been for Kirtland's warblers and sharp-tailed grouse and other species. So they've been a very bird-friendly group to work with. And one of the things we're doing right now, so in the long term, we got to think of how do we get more jack pine, old jack pine, back on the landscape, and that's what Brian mentioned. In the short term, one thing that we're doing is piloting a little project on a small stand where the habitat is all right. There's old jack pine, there's blueberry in the ground layer, there's some moss in the ground layer, but there's too much of that mid-level shrub, oak, hazel in particular. We're going to do a project to remove that brush and see if we can get a positive response from breeding Connecticut warblers. And so that's mechanical management work that's taking place this fall. And potentially even by next spring or summer, maybe we'll see some sort of response. And if that type of management can work on that stand, and then maybe that's something we can apply to other stands in the area as time moves forward and create more breeding ground habitat for the Connecticut warbler here. We're also trying to raise more funds for Connecticut warblers. So you are all aware of the Great Wisconsin Birdathon, Bird Protection Fund managed by the Natural Resource Foundation, another great partner. And one of the beneficiaries this year in terms of projects that have been funded through those dollars raised is the Connecticut warbler. And so we've got an additional money available to do some Connecticut warbler work this year. Also raising funds for the Neotropical Flyways project. So we're increasing our investment to that project. This is a project in Central America, Northern South America, that's working at stopover sites and identifying what birds are where and how to protect them. And so through DNR and NRF, sending dollars down to those projects to help many of our birds that spend the summer here. The last thing that we've been doing quite a bit is awareness. So presentations like this to the public, you've seen some media articles, things like that, trying to raise the red flag, essentially, putting the Connecticut warbler on folks' radar screens. If you're a birder, you kind of know about Connecticut warblers, even if you don't know a lot about them. If you're not a birder, you probably don't know anything about them. And so it's pretty hard to protect things you don't care about. And so we've got to put this bird out there, and that's what we're trying to do. We're spreading the word in the professional scientific community as well through the Upper Miss Great Lakes Joint Venture, partnerships like the Northern Forest Bird Network. So essentially getting in touch with others who are involved in land management or scientific research and so forth. And a big thing that I'm very proud of, we just hosted a one-day virtual summit on October 21st, where we were able to gather 27 partners from the entire breeding range all the way across Canada, from Quebec in the east to British Columbia in the west, Minnesota, Michigan, as well as some international representation to the south. And we got together for a day and we talked about what's going on with Connecticut warblers in each of our respective regions. We discussed challenges to the Connecticut warbler, what type of research is out there, what are some of the information gaps that we need to tackle, and so forth. And that was very positive. We'll be putting out some results on a website for that any day now. So stay tuned because you'll be able to access a lot of that material. And that's just the start. We hope to develop that into a working group that will meet periodically to advance the priority actions to help save the Connecticut warbler. And that's really going to be where we get a lot of bang for our buck, I think, because we're thinking at the bigger scale, not just a few birds here in Wisconsin. And last slides, how can you help? So The first thing you can do is try not to disturb the last few birds that we have left. We have some issues with too many birders visiting the site. Connecticut Warblers highly sought. It's on a lot of people's wish list. If they don't get one during migration, they often end up going up there in June. And just visiting is fine. Listening from the road, hey, there's a Connecticut Warbler, that's great. The problem is a lot of folks don't realize that's private land and they go wandering in there. So that's a problem. There's a lot of people who want to get that picture, and so they're playing audio, trying to lure in or get that money shot, so to speak. And so these are things obviously can't happen when you just have a few birds left. So we highly recommend just keeping disturbance to a minimum. If you do go, just listen from the road. Don't put the bird into eBird and lead the next people to it. Vaguely plot it somewhere else, something like that. We don't need you to let us know that there's still birds there. We're following that. Now, if you find Connecticut Warblers somewhere else, we definitely want to know about that. So by all means, help us build the greater picture. But this site needs to get less traffic from birders during the breeding season.
Yeah, and pardon the interruption, but it does seem like right now, I mean, we only know of 3 territories last summer in the whole state.
Yep.
So, so that they really need us to be delicate with them. And for me, being the guy who was on their breeding grounds early on, until I started figuring out that they were definitely with fledglings, I was actually watching where I was putting my feet. Like I had routes that would go in where I would use non-vegetated areas, even like plains pocket gopher mounds and stuff like that to place my feet, just because I knew you're not going to step on a Connecticut warbler nest in a plains pocket gopher mound. And I also, when I would get into good habitats, I would work through and do through walking instead of terminal walking, because predators will follow human footprints, out of curiosity and scent. And so if I'm doing a lot of terminal trails, I could be leading a fox or somebody else right up to a point of interest. And so I never had terminal trails. I always had through trails. So for me, it was actually a little paranoia inducing, a little nerve wracking to be trying to figure out that much information in what at the time I really was pretty convinced was the last 3 territories in the state. And so it was quite an honor, but something I never once took lightly. And I think that I became very, very aware of that they don't like it when you're by their fledglings. The full-on distraction display, it takes a lot of energy out of them, and you step in the wrong place, and that little mouse-like bird that you didn't know was there could be the end of it. So
not only, in this case it's private land, so you shouldn't be in there, but that if you are, you have the potential to cause that damage as well, as a visitor to the site. So so please spread the word to reduce impact at this location. All right, last slide. Here are some other things. Most of these are general things you can do to help migratory birds, including the Connecticut warbler. One of the challenges with this bird is there's not a lot of direct ways that many people can help at home. If you happen to own jack pine acreage in the Northwest, or maybe a large bit of land that has tamarack or black spruce bog, something like that, maybe there's some habitat management opportunities, but most people don't. So how can you help? You want to try and promote migration stopover habitat, use native plants. This is a ground foraging bird that likes rooting through the leaves, so leave the leaves and help them with some foraging habitat. Reduce threats like window collisions, outdoor cats, maybe reduce any pesticide use, those sorts of things. Drinking shade-grown coffee. I put a graphic in there. Many of you know about this already, but on the wintering grounds, if you have sun-grown coffee, a lot of habitat is lost. It's less favorable for birds. If you're drinking shade-grown coffee there on the right, it's grown within a more suitable habitat for many of our neotropical migrant species. Make a donation, bird protection fund through NRF, DNR, through our website, or a variety of ways, tax checkoff, license plates, or you can go to the Neotropical Flyways website, and they have a direct way that you can donate there. And then lastly, write your legislator. You've probably heard of this legislation, Recovering America's Wildlife Act, or RAWA. It still needs to go to, I believe, the Senate for a vote. Things look okay, but we really need senators to vote in favor of this legislation. And what this legislation would do is funnel many more dollars into the world of non-game management. So I think right now the number is close to $1 million, and from the federal government goes to each state to implement their wildlife action plans. This act would bump that number to 18 million or somewhere in that ballpark. So it would be a tremendous boon to be able to work on species like the Connecticut warbler before it's too late, before they become endangered and threatened, and you're kind of trying to dig yourself out of that hole. So write your legislator. There's a great website, Google Wisconsin Coalition for RAWA or something like that. And there's an excellent website where you can get all the contact info and probably some template emails and things like that. And thanks for your patience. We were very long tonight. Both Brian and I are not short with words. So we apologize, but thanks for sticking with us, and hopefully you got the story.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Are there questions out there?
We had one in the chat about whether there was a fire event in the core area.
Yes, there was, right? That's about a mid 20th century, right?
Yeah, I don't know a lot of the details, but in doing some digging, what we understand was there was a natural fire event right at the existing site where the birds still are at, and may have driven the sort of habitat and soil components, that would develop that habitat into what it is.
The other question we had from the chat is, can we limit this species in eBird reporting?
Can we limit the species? What limit?
Oh,
the
like
species?
hide it?
You can hide it. So after you report it, you could hide it, and then it's only visible on the back end. It's not in the public outputs, and it won't send out alerts. So that's something that you could do. Hiding's a little tricky because if someday you want to unhide it, you got to remember you got to go find it and unhide it maybe some years down the line or something like that, if the birds are gone or it's no longer a concern or something like that.
Yeah.
The other strategy is to just plot it vaguely, not near the main site, and then you're not leading people to any one spot.
But if on that though, if you do get good GPS coordinates, keep them in your records somewhere, because I think the history is valuable at some point. Ryan, now I'm a contractor, so I probably can't speak for it quite the same, but I think you'll agree, if somebody is hearing a Connecticut warbler after the 10th of June in the great state of Wisconsin, I think you'd want to know about it, right?
Yeah, we want to definitely know about any of those birds after the first week of June, certainly mid-June into late July, and then once you hit August, you can start getting migrants again.
I was wondering if you can hide this one site somehow that you're trying to protect.
No, you can't, unfortunately. It gets, eBird doesn't have those nuances quite yet. You can't hide just certain dates, so it's got to be like months or something. And there's just different limitations. We're just not quite there yet. That would be ideal, but we can't quite do it at this time. And as you know, there are some species in eBird we made sensitive species, and all the public data is kind of blurred, right? So some of the owls, like great gray owl is one of them. And some of them are seasonal. Loggerhead shrikes, we made one, and I think there's some on there for long-eared owl to protect winter roosts, stuff like that. There's negative sides to doing that, especially if you're doing it year-round. So we've thought about it hard, and we'll keep doing that. But for now, we felt like it wasn't best to just kind of hide everything about the Connecticut warbler. And we're hoping that people will reduce their visitation and either hide their records or not plot it precisely, or wait to plot it, until well after the breeding season.
Did anybody else have any questions they wanted to ask? We'll give it another minute or two or a question or two. We have someone wondering about the bioacoustic sensors that could help. And hang on, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I flipping around here. If you want to just ask your question, ask it. Jonathan.
Yeah, like
Otherwise-
just a question about like what I was using and how this could expand.
Yeah, in
Yeah, so
detecting,
it's-
yeah,
yeah,
maybe
it's-
2 or 3 times as far as the human ear. How much more does it do?
Oh,
Yeah, my question, can you hear me?
yep,
Yes.
hear you just fine.
Okay, my question was about the technology of bioacoustic sensors and how they're advancing. And I understand from what Brian said that he could hear a Connecticut warbler from over a third of a mile away. But with some of the technology that might be available, is there like a chance that an acoustic sensor could go along with the surveyor, like a more advanced one, or one could be placed and bear proofed or animal proofed in an area and be able to sense Connecticut warblers from like 2 miles away or a mile away? Or I'm just wondering, like with the computer technology that can analyze some of them sounds too that come into the sensors, maybe you could have like a much wider area that you could survey when you found a location that looked like prime habitat.
Yeah, so and Ryan, you might have something to add. I'll tell you about what I use. The Zoom H4n is really clear, but it doesn't enhance the distance at which something can be heard. But I know that some people can use parabolics and they can pick up things just even with older technology that we can't pick up with our ears. But I think, yeah, and having bear box type monitoring stations would be similar to what I think I was doing. But as far as the one of the drawbacks of that, I suppose if you have a computer analyzing it, that could save a lot of time. One of the drawbacks is when you make a bioacoustic recording, then you've got to listen to it at least once. I've been through July 3rd. I think I've been through it about 4 times now. So the 4 hours that I recorded on July 3rd has been 16 hours of time at the couch. And I guess, yeah, in the immediate area of our core area, we walked that. In June, we point counted it, we call responsed it, we did a lot of things. We transected enough that if a bird would have sung even a few times, I think we would have picked it up because, again, you can hear them at 690 meters. So pounding the ground with the feet and getting around and being in those habitats and immersing in those habitats, I think we can cover the 15 square miles around there. So yeah, I guess I don't know if one thing that's great about bird surveyors is we're pretty inexpensive compared to high technology. A bird surveyor running for a whole summer costs about the same as like radio collaring 4 bobcats or something. So, so we're, I think that's maybe a fair way of saying it, right? We're pretty inexpensive. Birds are highly detectable. So, yeah, it's a really good question.
The Canadians are using automated recording units, ARUs, extensively for a lot of their bird surveys. Especially they're doing a lot of survey work in roadless areas. So they have to deploy them by helicopter and then retrieve them by helicopter. They've got a whole season's worth, and then they get them analyzed, through computers. So there's definitely a current use and a potential future for increased use of ARUs to monitor Connecticut warblers, especially given these remote habitats within their range. Here in Wisconsin, maybe we could deploy some out into some historical areas, to look at those repeatedly. But right now, I just don't think there's anything to count, no matter how far of a radius it is. There's just not out there. But something that we are keeping in mind is that increased use of ARUs.
Okay, we'll take this one last question. Manley?
Has there been any, either in the United States or Canada, any banding or radio transmitters used on Connecticut warblers?
The only tracking devices, to my knowledge, used so far are geolocators. So the ones that use light level, and then you have to recapture the birds. And there's 2 projects that have used those. One of them recovered 4 birds, I think. So there was data on 4 that came back, and I think the other study got data back from 9. And so it's from, those are the only ones that have been tracked beyond localized movements. And that's where we know of the Grand Chaco and the general winter area. That's how we know some of them are going, many of them are going to the eastern US, and then some of them are launching over the Atlantic Ocean for several days, those sorts of things. But as the technology improves and we can get different devices on them and make that effort more efficient, yeah, I think you're going to see tracking devices really play a big role in our developing our understanding of the species and where it's not only geographically occupying, but what habitats it's occupying. Right now, we don't know anything in South America. I mean, I don't know, no one, it doesn't sound like anyone even walks around down there and sees Connecticut warblers.
Yeah.
You know, so like, it's just a giant mystery at this point. And in some ways that's exciting because it's all new, right? There's a cool, like, novel factor to that. But on the flip side, it's a severe barrier to immediately conserving them. And we gotta fill those gaps. And that's what this working group is trying to work towards, you know, that we just started is, you know, what do we have to do?
Okay, I think we're going to wrap things up then. Thank you both very, very much for all the information and the great stories. We really appreciate the opportunity to hear about the Connecticut Warbler.
All right, well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.